In the Sicha, in Pashas Vaeira, in Chelek Aleph, in the first Sicha in Pashas Vaeira, the Rebbe brings the Chakira Benegea to the mitzvah of Haseba. We know that on Pesach there's a din of Haseba, that there's a mitzvah to eat, v'hu meisav derech smeil, derech cherus. And the Rebbe brings two Eifanim to understand in the mitzvah of Haseba. One is that Haseba is a prat. The halacha is that Eimasai tzarech lahasiv, the mitzvah of Haseba is beikar by achilas matzah and shtiyas dalet cases. That's what it says in halacha. That's what you see in the sugi of the Gemara. B'meila, you could learn that the whole din of Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah and shtiyas dalet cases. That just like there's other dinim in how to eat the matzah and how to drink the dalet cases, so one of the dinim in the eifen achila shtiyas is that they have to be b'Haseba. The second eifen says the Rebbe is fakert, that Haseba is a mitzvah klos b'fnei atzma. L'chol hadayis, the ikar chiyuv Haseba is by matzah and dalet cases, like you see in the Gemara and in halacha. But according to the second eifen, that's because when is a person makayim this mitzvah b'fnei atzma of Haseba through eating matzah and drinking dalet cases by Haseba. Haste us that in matzah and dalet cases, besides that they're a separate mitzvah for themselves, they're also a prat in Haseba that through eating matzah by Haseba is makayim mitzvah Haseba. The general nafkamina, says the Rebbe, is if you ate matzah without Haseba, does that affect the achilas matzah? Or not? Is it just a problem in not being mekayim the mitzvah of Haseba? L'chol hadayis, the halacha is, like we'll see that if you ate matzah or you drank the cases, those things that are supposed to be b'Haseba, and you didn't do Haseba, so you have to do it over. That means whether I say that the reason for the Haseba is for the matzah, and if you ate matzah without Haseba, felt in the mitzvah for matzah, or you say it's for Haseba, and what you're missing is the mitzvah of Haseba, it's just the takanas chachamim was that the Haseba should be together with matzah and dalet cases. Either way, if I was missing the Haseba b'shas I ate the matzah or drank the cases, I have to eat over the matzah, whether because I wasn't Yetzer matzah yet, or because I wasn't Yetzer Haseba, and Haseba needs matzah as a prat in the mitzvah of Haseba. So the halacha l'maisa, according to both stadim, is the same, that you have to eat over the matzah. Nevertheless, as the Rebbe, there will be a nafkamina la'halacha l'maisa, as the lashon in the Sicha. There will be a practical nafkamina that comes out from why I need to eat over the matzah a second time if I ate it the first time b'shalei b'Haseba. Nafkamina is the second time do I have to make a bracha al achilas matzah. If I say that the reason that I ate it the first time was a chsaron in the mitzvah of matzah, because Haseba is a prat in a matzvah, the din of achilas matzah, the din of Haseba is how to be yetzer properly, the mitzvah of matzah. So when I'm eating a second time matzah, it's in order to be mashlam the mitzvah of achilas matzah. Mashenkin, and therefore I have to make al achilas matzah. Mashenkin, if the reason why I'm eating it over is just because I'm missing in the mitzvah of Haseba, and in order to fulfill properly the mitzvah of Haseba, I have to now eat matzah by Haseba. So the second time is just a kiyum mitzvah Haseba, it's not a kiyum mitzvah matzah, and obviously there's no place for a bracha al achilas matzah. So, first of all, just an important thing to point out, l'chaira, in this nafkamina l'halacha l'maisa. So first of all, the Rebbe says in the Ha'ara, the Rebbe adds, that it's possible that this halacha l'maisa, this nafkamina l'maisa, is also only me'ikr hadin. It's not l'maisa mamish, but it's me'ikr hadin. And the Rebbe explains this. He says, we see in Shulchan Aruch, in Tahara 12, Fima shekasav haramas in Tafayim Beis Siv Zayin, and Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Siv Tezvav, the Rama says that by case Gimel V'Dalid, if you ate it without Haseba, and if you drank, those cases, the third and fourth case without Haseba, if you drink it over, you'll need a new bracha beir priagafen, and that will create an additional side problem that it's nira kemesef ala cases. You don't want to have the pchashash of nira kemesef ala cases. Therefore, says the Rama, so if you drank those two cases without Haseba, don't drink it over. And biseimach and the Ravya, that the Ravya says that bisman hazeh ein derech lahasiv, and you b'chlal don't need a Haseba. So even though we paskin that you need a seiba, but in such a case be seimach on the Ravya where the drinking an extra kais will cause a additional problem of achshash of nira kamesav ala cases. Based on that, says the Rebbe, if we're going to say that eating the second kizayis matzah beseba would be a suffix whether you make a bracha al achilas matzah, so halacha lemaisa, if there's a suffix, so therefore making a bracha would be achshash of a bracha levatala lepeil. Based on that achra of the Rama, we would say here too, don't make a bracha and be seimach on the Ravya, like the Rama says, who says that anyways you don't have to do a seiba, so therefore if you don't have to do a seiba, so you were yetzer matzah the first time, and there's no need for a bracha the second time. That's what the Rebbe says in the Hara. Lefiza hamavur b'fnim hu me'ikra din. The nafkamina that the Rebbe says about whether you need a bracha al achilas matzah when you eat over the kazayis without with be'aseiba the second time is me'ikra din l'payel, since it would be a suffix halacha l'maisa would be not to make a bracha the second time. So important to point out, first of all, in this Ramah, so the lashon of the Ramah in Tafayim Beis, the Ramah that the Rebbe brings in Tafayim Beis Siv Zayin, the Ramah, it says kol mi shetzarech haseiba im achal leishasa b'lei haseiba lo yatsa v'tzarech lachsa v'lecha v'lishtis b'haseiba. The din is, the Mechaber says, that if you ate not b'haseiba, you for sure have to eat over b'haseiba, eat or drink over b'haseiba. And like we said, that din, the Rebbe Nemzan with a pshitas in the Sicha, is understood according to both sides. Says the Ramah, Haga v'yeshem the bizman hazeh the ein derech lahasif k'day Ravya lismei chalav sheb'diavad yatsa b'lei yasif. He brings an aguda from Rishonim that b'diavad al kapanim there's the dasa Ravya. The Ravya says that you b'chlal don't need a seiba bizman hazeh. So even though we don't paskin, we say he's a das yachid, we paskin that you need a seiba, but you could be seimach on the Ravya le'inyim b'diavad. This Yeshemrim says, the Aguda said, that b'diavad, if you ate something that you were supposed to eat b'seiba, shalei b'seiba, kalpana b'diavad, you don't have to eat it over. So the Ramah is machriya, v'nirali, depends if it's something that you could eat it over or drink it over b'heseiba without causing any problems, like the matzah, unless it's the afikeman. So to eat over another kazayis matzah is not going to cause any problems. The cases, those cases that are not going to cause any problems. So drink it over or eat it over b'heseiba. Don't be seimach on the Ravya, even b'diavad. But those cases where drinking another case will cause a problem, which is, says the Ramah, Imshasa case shlishi revi b'heseiba. I'm sorry, case shlishi revi b'heseiba. Ein lachser v'lishtes b'heseiba. Because the third or fourth case where you would have to remake over the bracha beir piagafen if you drink it over, the yeshbech shash nira k'meisif ala cases. So there taka be seimach on the Ravya. Aval b'shnei cases rishenis yachser v'yishta b'lei bracha. He brings this from Minhagim. So the Ramah is basically saying that even though the first Yashemrim, the first day has said that since the Ravya said that Bizman Hazeh you don't need a seiba, so you never need to do something over b'diavad, b'seimich and Ravya linyan b'diavad. The Ramah says no, don't go so far. Even b'diavad, if you did something that requires a seiba, shalei b'seiba, do it over b'seiba. But at least b'seimich and Ravya in those cases where if you're going to do it over, it will create a side problem. That was the svara that Rebbe brought in the Ara. So there, b'inyan b'diavad, b'seimach and Ravya to avoid causing a side problem, which is by case Gimel Dalet, causing the problem of the chash of nira k'meisav ala keiches, since in those two cases you would have to make a new bracha beir piagafen. And this says the Ramah, uvechein ba'achilas matzah. What's v'chein ba'achilas matzah? This din that the Ramah said by dalet cases is also by achilas matzah. B'pashtus you could teach the Ramah v'chein ba'achilas matzah that just like by cases where it will cause a problem, you shouldn't do it over. So too by matzah, which means that the only time by matzah you should eat over the matzah b'seiba is the first kazayis matzah, not afikeman, because afikeman is a problem to eat after afikeman, just like the case gimel v'dalid. And also by matzah, don't make a bracha of al achilas matzah. Don't do it without a bracha. By cases we're talking about the birches hanenin, By matzah it would be the birchas hamitzvahs, but the same svara that the Ramah said by the kaisis is also there by achilas matzah, which is exactly what the Rebbe says in the Ha'ara. You would be able to say that this is what the Ramah says when he says v'chein b'achilas matzah. It sounds like this is taka how the Mishnah Brura is teaching the Ramah, because the Mishnah Brura in Sifkat and Chav Beis, on the words of the Ramah v'chein v'achilas matzah, he says Hainu sheyachser v'yechel hakizayis matzah ubeloi bracha. That what the Ramah is making the tzushta b'achilas matzah, that achilas matzah is the same as dal kaisis, that you have to eat it over, because by matzah there's no problem eating it over. But beloi bracha, just like by dal kaisis, and he adds that by afikamin you shouldn't even eat it over. But that it doesn't sound like he's teaching that that's the meaning of the Ramah. He's saying umihu, that's the din. But the fact that matzah you eat beloi bracha, meaning without a birchas al achilas matzah, because that's the only bracha that would be a shaila by matzah, it seems like the Mishnah Brura is teaching that in the Ramah, that's what the Ramah means, v'chein b'achilas matzah, that just like by dalit cases where there's a problem, by dalit cases the problem is achshash of nir kameis cases yisemech and deravya, so too by matzah where there would be a problem, which would be, since it's a suffix, as a birchas hamitzvahs would be a problem, you could be semech and deravya lenient the birchas hamitzvahs. Clearly, the Rebbe is not learning this pshat in the Ramah, because the Rebbe says this doesn't bring this from the Ramah. The Rebbe just brings that according to what the Ramah says by dalit cases. So we would be able to say, according to what the Ramah says by dalit cases. So the Rebbe fears is. Says according to Ramah, we would be able to say the same thing by matzah. So clearly the Rebbe is not learning that that's pshat in the Ramah. Of course, if the Rebbe learned that the Ramah says that you don't have to make a bracha, then the Rebbe would be bring the din from the Ramah that the Ramah says, but that the Ramah says for a side reason, and you could bring a raya from that to either way. But the Rebbe is saying this as a side thing, that according to the Ramah we could say this achra, and therefore say it's only a shayla mikra din. And l'chayra, that's based on the Alter Rebbe, that it seems that the Alter Rebbe does not teach this way in the Ramah. Again, maybe someone will argue that the Mishnah Brura is also not saying this pshat in the Ramah. The Mishnah Brura is just saying that's the din. I don't think that's the lashon. The lashon he says is hainu. When the Ramah says v'chein matzah, he says hainu shechayzer va'oichel u'b'lei bracha. That seems to be the way he's teaching in the Ramah. But Akapanim in the Alter Rebbe over there in Siman Tezvav, the Alter Rebbe clearly is not teaching the Ramah that way, because the Alter Rebbe in Siman Tezvav says Kol mi shetzarech lahasiv v'achol ishasa b'lei yaseba tzarech lachzer v'lecha v'lishtis b'yaseba mi'ikra din. Alav ava lefi sheyesh emrim shebizman hazeh ein tzarech lahasiv klal b'medini seilu yesh lismech al divreyem le'inyan sheb'diavad yatsa b'lei haseba. Says that's the first day of the Ramah. The Yesh Emrim that always l'gabi b'diavad you could be seimach on the Ravya. Umikol makom l'inyan achilas matzah teiv lahachmer lachzer v'lechel b'aseba. By matzah, there's no problem, there's no chisaron in eating it over. So why be seimach on the Ravya by every b'diavad, even b'diavad, eat it over b'aseba, because most days don't hold like the Ramah. And what are you going to lose? What about dalit cases? He says, by dalit cases, it depends if it'll create a problem. And the Alter Rebbe is mefaret. V'chein in case sheni im shasa b'lei yaseba yachzer v'yishta b'aseba. V'ein tzarech lachzer l'varach be'er pe'agafen anyways. And then mashenkin case gimel and dalit, and case rishon, it depends if he made a tanai, and the Alter Rebbe says the arichos of the dinim by the cases. So the Alter Rebbe brought the inyan of matzah before the dalit cases and the pratim of dalit cases. So clearly, the Alter Rebbe isn't learning that when the Ramah said v'chein linyan matzah, it means that by matzah you shouldn't make a bracha, because the bracha will create a problem, and l'gabe the bracha you should be seimech on the Ravya. Because if the Alter Rebbe learned that pshat in the Ramah, then the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring anywhere that din of the Ramah, because the Alter Rebbe brought down the halach of matzah before he brought the halach of the alt cases. So the Alter Rebbe, there's no way that you could taich ein the dinner that he's saying by matzah, that includes the fact that you don't make a bracha. So it's hatnish kenart that the Ramah would bring a din by matzah about Sai eating it over and Sai not making a bracha, and the Alter Rebbe would be mashmit the fact of not making a bracha. So clearly the Alter Rebbe is learning that when the Ramah says v'chein le'inyan achilas matzah, it's just lagabe the ikir hadin. Yeah, he brought the pratim, the Ramah brought the pratim by dal cases, and now he's going back to the ikir hadin that sarach lachzer v'lesif, the way he started off the sif. And I see this also in the Kaf HaChaim on this Ramah, v'chein b'achilas matzah, ratzalemer diyesh lahachmer v'lachzer v'lechel b'haseba. He brings this to Akimesha is Dalid, and Raz is Tezvav. He brings it from the Alter Rebbe Taka. So he brings from the Alter Rebbe this inyan that the pshat in the Ramah is just the ikar adin that you have to eat it over. So the Mishabura seems to learn otherwise in the Ramah. The Alter Rebbe and the Kaf HaChaim brings this from the Akimesha, so then it's clear in the Ramah. But the Alter Rebbe clearly Al Kapanim is learning Pshat in the Ramah that's not included in the Ramah, and therefore based on that is the Rebbe in this Ha'ara says this just as an additional halacha that we could be machriya based on the Ramah, that since a bracha could create a suffix bracha levatala, we would be able to be machriya legabi the bracha anyways if it's not 100% sure to be seimech on the Ravya, al pi divrei haramah, and therefore the shaila is only be'ikra adin. Okay, so this is the nafkamina the Rebbe says. Now, in the Olam HaYeshivas is Ragil is known to say this Chakira by Haseba b'shem the Griz, the Brisker Rav. In his Sefer Al Rambam in Perek Zayin Halacha Zayin from Hilchas Chametz Umatzah, he discusses the Chakira. He says the Tutstadim brings the Rayas a little bit differently, and he comes to different maskanas, like we'll see soon. So just to point out a few of the things that he says. So the Griz discusses this Chakira. He brings a raya that the Rambam holds that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, because the Rambam says im heisef b'chol hasuda b'shar achilasi yishtiyasi im heisef arezem mishubach. If you would say it's a prat in matzah and dalet cases, vi pasu zagin arezem mishubach to do Haseba by any other part of achila shtiyah, that's not achila shtiyah the mitzvah. So this raya the Rebbe brings in the Sikha, in the Hemshech HaSikha, in Siv Daled, the Rambam says, "Ameisa b'chol asuda reizem mishubach." It's Eisa mitzvah min hamufcher. But the Rebbe is doichet this raya. He says, "B'yontif the kol asuda mitzvah." So therefore, could be a seba as a prat in the mitzvahs that you do on this night, but a chsudas yontif is one of the mitzvahs that you do on this night. L'chayra the hasbara in this dechiyah of the Rebbe, a teisvis beer, is because on this the pshat that it's a sudas mitzvah, since it's a sudas yontif, so a sudas yontif that you eat on Pesach, that's part of, because what the Rebbe says that if it's a prat in mitzvahs, it's a prat in those mitzvahs that in yonim is chayros. So even if I say the Suda of Yontif is a mitzvah of Sudas Yontif, Asat Sutamit Chayros, that a Seba should be a prat in the mitzvah of Sudas Yontif. L'chayra, the answer is Pashat. Sudas Yontif of Pesach, the Suda of the Suda, that mitzvah of eating a Suda is because that's part of celebrating the Yontif. That's why it's part of the mitzvah of Pesach. Befrat on Pesach, that Yesh Lahesef, one of the Simonei HaSeder is Shulchan Aruch. All the Simonei HaSeder part of the Seder Lo Pesach, that's part of the mitzvahs of Laila Zeh, that in Yanam is the Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. The Shulchan Aruch is part of that, because the Shulchan Aruch has in it part of the Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, and like it is Bepashtas, the Sudas Yontif of the person feeling the covet and the einig of the Yontif of Pesach, of Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, on Pesach is part of the Simcha, part of the Chizcherus of Yitzias Mitzrayim, this Suda. Olahoyer, like the Gemara says, like we know, the Rebbe brings it a few times, Atu Rosh Chodesh lemusafen ahani letmidim lo yahani, that on Rosh Chodesh the carbon tamid is also, you eat the carbon tamid you have every day, but the tamid of Rosh Chodesh has to do with Rosh Chodesh, so it's a hani. Mela, the same thing, the Pesach is a hani to this mitzvah of Sudas Yontif also. If I would say it's bechlal, not a mitzvah, so then we pass to Zagin as a seba zal zayin a prat in them, that the way to be Mekayim it is only B'Seba if it's not a mitzvah b'chal. But if it's a mitzvah, so then it's a strong svara. Any mitzvah that's part of the Pesach, even though I have this mitzvah on other Yomim Tevim, but the mitzvah of the Suda of Pesach, it's the Sudas Yontif of Pesach, is in Yana Cheiros, and therefore it has a Al-Kapanim, it's a mitzvah min ha-mufchar din Yana Seba, that's a prat in Cheiros. So that's how the Rebbe is doiche this raya. However, in the Griz and in the other Achreinim adds a strong point to this raya, which, like we'll see, the Rebbe addresses that in the Ha'ara. He says, first of all, what would be the point of doing a seba by Shar Sudasi? But he says the Rosh argues. The Rosh holds that Haseba is a prat in mitzvahs matzah. He says, what's the raya? Because the Rosh holds that if you ate matzah shalei b'Haseba, you would have to eat it over b'lei Haseba. Why do you have to eat it over b'lei Haseba if it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma? Now this raya itself, even if you say that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, nevertheless the chachamim were misaken that the seba should be together with mitzvahs matzah, and therefore if you ate the matzah shalei b'seba, you have to eat it over. And like we said before, that's the hanacha right away in the beginning of the sikha, and that you have to say no matter what. Because even l'dvarav, even according to the tzad, that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, according to the Rambam, says ema saitzrichin lahasev b'shas achilas matzah. Like he has to also say that this mitzvah b'fnei atzma, the tzir, the eifin hatakana, was that it should be b'shas those mitzvahs that are there achiros, b'shas achilas kazayis matzah and shtiyas dalt cases, etc. Elamai, he says another word. That if you say that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, so when you ate matzah shalei b'haseba, hat nish gefelt in matzah, you were missing the mitzvah of a seba, and you have to eat the matzah over, not mitzad matzah, but mitzad mitzvah seba. But then what's it going to help to eat another kazayis matzah b'haseba? The second kazayis matzah is already not a mitzvah of matzah, so you're anyways not eating matzah b'haseba. You want to eat b'chlal b'haseba, so eating b'chlal b'haseba should be by anything. If it's not a prat in matzah, that means that the matzah you are yetze b'shleima, so what are you going to gain by eating another kazayis matzah shalei b'haseba? That's his raya. And since the Rosh says you have to eat over the matzah, is a raya that the first matzah you weren't mekayim mitzvahs matzah. And therefore, when you're eating over a matzah b'seba, the second time you're eating it is mitzvahs matzah. Because otherwise, what's the fardint? So the Rebbe in the Ha'ara, the Rebbe in the Ha'ara 11, Bavarns this. L'chayra efshar leichiach midin za atzmi shaseibu t'nai b'chilas matzah ki b'mhoisa seiba chayv b'fnei atzmi v'chashe ochal akazayis matzah shlei b'seiba kvar kiyam mitzvahs matzah mokim l'chayv v'eida pamas akazayis matzah b'seiba kivin shekvar kiyam mitzvahs matzah. L'chayra, if I say a seiba is not a pratim matzah, so eating matzah over is not matzah anymore. It's not mitzvah's matzah. And the Rebbe is shayl. He says, Aval eina. Ki al piza shasei buchiyah b'fnei atzma. And the Chachamim were misaken the tziyur of mitzvah saseba, that it should be while you're eating the matzah. Eina pira shechiyuva chol keshemekayim mitzvah achilas matzah, ki em sheteknua ba'achilas matzah lefi shem zeicher legula v'cheirus. And ken yesh lem eshav shekvar kiyem mitzvah matzah chivu Chacham lechel eda pa matzah zeicher legula v'cheirus b'aseba. So the Rebbe says, and then the Rebbe brings the Yerushalmi, which we'll see in a minute. But the Rebbe says, if a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, why did they say that the emasai chayev chiyuv zeh l'kula yom? When is this mana chiyuv b'shas achilas kezayis matzah or achilas dalet or shtiyas dalet cases? Because the seba, the mitzvah b'fnei atzma, is, which is to show derech eros. How do you show derech eros for a seba? Through doing the mitzvahs that are derech eros b'haseba. And therefore they said, when should I be mekayim this mitzvah of a seba, which is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma? B'shas, I'm doing the other inyanim that are derech eros, and I'm doing them b'haseba. Says the Rebbe, is mechadish in this ha'ara, but the Rebbe says it as a davar pasha. It is not the pshat that when I'm doing something that's a mitzvah of derech eros, and I do that mitzvah b'haseba, through that I'm mekayim the mitzvah b'fnei atzma of haseba. That haseba is b'shas matzah, because the ma'isa of achilas matzah is a inyan of cheros. Even when I'm not being mekayim mitzvahs matzah, the teichen of matzah, the mitzias of matzah, the cheftza of matzah on Pesach is cheros. Matzah shows on cheros. And therefore the rest of the matzah that I eat on Lil Pesach is an inyan of cheros, and therefore they said matzah is b'aseba. So even though the second kizayis matzah that I eat is not a mitzvah of achilas matzah, because I was already mekayim the mitzvah, it still helps for the mitzvah of haseba, because the matzah is an inyan of cheros, and haseba is to do an inyan of cheros b'aseba. The same thing by the Dalet case is even stronger. So, first of all, the Rebbe brings a Yerushalmi right afterwards. That the Yerushalmi says, "Oisei kizayis sh'adam yetzi be'pesach tzarech lo eichlei meisif," and that says, the Yerushalmi says that when is the mitzvah of haseba? B'shas oisei kizayis. B'shas, the person is eating that kizayis that is yetzi the mitzvah. According to the vart of the Rebbe now, it's not connected with that kizayis matzah. It's not the mitzvah of matzah that has to be b'haseba. It's the inyan of matzah. It's the ma'isa of achilas matzah, even if it's not the mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, the Yerushalmi says, Eiseh kizayis. B'derech klal, the first time you eat matzah has to be b'haseba. The first time you're eating matzah is Eiseh kizayis. But there's on the Iker question, there's another answer. There's a Maral. The Maral is in Gvuras Hashem, and he brings it in the Shitta. There's a diok that the Rebbe brings in the Sikha, and that the Achreinim bring in an opposite way, we'll see soon. It says, the Rebbe brings the Gemara, Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Hashama sha'achal kezayis matzah yatsa. Shama sheyatsa achal kezayis matzah yatsa. I'm sorry. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Hashama sheyachal Shashama sha'achal kezayis matzah kshu mesiv yatsa mesiv in loy mesiv loy. Vashamash Eira Kezayis Matzah, when he was Mesiv, he was Yetzer. Soon we'll see the Gris brings this Gemara as a raya to the Rambam. But you see that when he's Mesiv, he's Yetzer. But so there's a diok. What's the Yotza? Yotza is mashma his Yetzer b'di'evet. Vaeira, if he ate a kezayis matzah and he did a seba, so he did the mitzvah. What yotza? Once he finished the kezayis matzah, there's no more mitzvah of matzah anymore. So the Maral that the Shita Mekubetzes on Psachim brings down, the Maral makes this deal. Why is it b'diavad? Yeshli lumit. So it's from this he wants to learn out a chiddush din. Shakol ma sha'eichel matzah below Pesach tzarech haseba. The afagav the yetzer bekizayis echad im achal harbe hakel hi mitzvah achas. V'yeser adif she'kol achilase b'mitzvah lefichach yesh leilechel kol achila shel matzah b'seba shuderech eres. Medayik from this Rambam ameir de kechidish lahalacha de Maral, that when you eat matzah on Pesach, like this misvara, we would say the first kezayis matzah is a mitzvah. After that, you are yetzer a mitzvah, and you're eating matzahs, you're eating crackers. Says the Maral, the fact that it says that the shamash is yotza b'diavad, which means l'chatchila he had to do more than just eat one kezayis b'seba, is a raya, is a yisoid. He says that when you eat matzah below Pesach, any matzah that you eat below Pesach is a mitzvah. Even though you're only mechuyev to eat a kezayis, but the entire matzah that you eat is a mitzvah, and therefore lechatchila you should do a seba throughout, not all of the matzah that you eat throughout Leil Pesach. B'meila, the Gemara is mechadish that nevertheless, if the shamash ate only the kezayis matzah by seba, he's still yetza, even though he should have done haseba by all of the matzah that he ate. According to the Maral, Geitarap, anyways, that question of the griz, that's his whole basis for his hechrech in the Shitas Harash. And the question that the Rebbe is about learning in this Hara. So there's another answer. The answer is that the matzah is a mitzvah. There's some mitzvah by all the matzah you eat the first night. It's taka big chiddush. But by lulav we see this, by daled minim we see there's like shiarei mitzvah, like the Rambam says that hayaminig anshe Yerushalayim, they would walk around with the daled minim a whole day. Weistes, there was some inyan of a mitzvah in it, not just the nanuim, which is called b'chlal the shiarei mitzvah. Sukkah is minadin. Every suda that you eat is a extra mitzvah, even though you don't have to eat the suda. By matzah, there's a svara that the Rebbe says the Rebbe doesn't hold of it to some degree, but the Rebbe brings in other places that Chassidus says this somewhat at this svara. There's a svara that there's some kiyum mitzvah, and another svarim says the svara that there's some kiyum mitzvahs matzah kol shiva whenever a person eats matzah on Pesach. So even though we don't say that ladina, but to say that there's some mitzvah of matzah and all the matzah that a person eats the first night, hatach tasanort. The Rebbe doesn't bring this answer. Not a raya that the Rebbe doesn't hold of this answer at all. The Rebbe says it's the question. There's a stronger answer that it's not negir the mitzvah of matzah. It's the chefs of achilas matzah. But akapanim we see there's an additional answer. So there's the hechrech in the Rosh that you can't say that the Rosh says that matzah is a mitzvah, that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, and that you were yetzer matzah the first time, because then what's the point of eating more matzah? So we see there's two answers on that. There's a point of eating more matzah because the etzem maisa of achilas matzah is a maisa of chayros that needs a seba, or because any matzah that a person eats the first night is a mitzvah, is part of the mitzvah. The Griz is maskana, his mahalach is, says the Rambam, says ha-meisiv b'chol ha-suda ha-reiz meshubach, is a raya that the Rambam holds that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. The Rosh says that when you ate a kezayis matzah leyatza and you have to eat it over by seba, is a raya that the Rosh holds a seba as a prate matzah. That's how he goes, and then he emphasizes the shamash the shamash achol kezayis according to both shittas. Maybe we'll come to that. The Rebbe brings the two different rayas, like we'll come to. And the Rebbe says there's no machlekes, there's two dinim in a seiba, and both dinim are l'chol hadays. So I just want to point out that maskana of the Griz is tamuha ma'id. In Shulchan Aruch, it says, in this sif that the Rebbe is bringing, Kol mi shetzarech haseiba, im ochel ha'shasa b'le haseiba, lo yatsa v'tzarech lachsa v'lecha v'lishtes b'haseiba. That's the din of the Rosh, that whatever you ate without a seiba, you have to eat over with a seiba. We're not talking about the Suda. We're not talking about the Sudas Yantif, that you have to eat the Sudas Yantif over by seiba. That's less man the Palakena, that's nicht getracht. In the end of the Sif in the Ramah brings Al Chatchila Yosef Kol Suda, which is the din of the Rambam. If the Rambam and the Rosh were a machlekes, that's based on two different shittas in a seiba, whether it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma or a prat in the matzah and the dal cases, haval toch nicht kahat kinard, that the mechaber and the Ramah in the same sif should bring both dinim, which is like taking two ends of the rope, two sides. It's zwei shittas was eine chelkizu also. It's clear that it's not a machlekes, it's muchach that the mechaber and the Ramah have nicht gelernt as a machlekes. Elamai, you have to say like the Rebbe's maskana that it's two dinim that both are there according to both days. So in the Iker Chakira, the Rebbe says in the Pnim of the Sicha two nafkaminas. First, a nafkamina in Svara, if it affects his kiyum hamitzvahs matzah, or no, it's just affects the kiyum mitzvahs haseba. And in that nafkamina, Gufay says it would come out a nafkamina la halacha l'maisa, if when you eat over, do you have to make a bracha al achilas matzah or not? And then in the Ha'ara 12, the Rebbe says that nafkamina is also only me'ikir adin. And then he says a nafkamina l'maisa, if someone ate matzah below haseba, and then he comes in a matzah where he no longer needs haseba, which we'll come back to. But in the Ha'aras, there's a third nafkamina in Ha'ara 9, which is not written mamish as a nafkamina, but in the Makir Hadvarim it said more as a nafkamina. Here it's more as a tzarachiyim. Rebbe says in the Ha'ara dain tzarachiyim l'fi asvara de haseba hi mitzvah b'fnei atzma. If you say a seiba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, b'm'i efsher lachila shtia nimsa b'veis asurim achayitzi baza. Someone is unable to eat on Pesach, so he's not going to eat matzah or dal cases or anything else. Rebbe gives the example, he's b'beis asurim, or there could be the example, someone who is a chayla, Rahman al-Tzlan, and therefore he's not able to eat. There's the famous tshuva of Rabbi Kiva B'negeit girl who was a chilanis, and she wanted to do the mitzvah of achila erev Yom Kippur. She needed Rabbi Kiva to tell her that she's pater and to be mefalpa. But there's a matzah of someone who's a chayla, he's not able to eat anything. Hayesh chiyuv b'haseiba l'chud. So does this person have a mitzvah of haseiba by itself? So if you would say that haseiba is a prat in matzah and all cases that without haseiba you're not yetzer those mitzvahs. So someone who's unable to be mekayim those mitzvahs, he's bebeis asurim or whatever reason, so then there's no chiyuv haseiba, because haseiba is only there as part of those mitzvahs. But if you say a seiba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, even though the tzir ha-mitzvah, the eifin ha-takana was to eat matzah b'seiba and to drink the alt cases b'seiba, but maybe someone who's not able to eat the matzah and drink the alt cases because he's b'veis asurim or whatever, at least do haseiba. And in the end, the Rebbe says lahar midin sukkah al derech zeh, that by sukkah, even though the bracha of Asher Kisharim Seisvanu on mitzvah sukkah is nistaken, the bracha is nistaken only by achila, and everything else is nigra achar achila. But someone who's not going to eat, so then he'll make the bracha on the other ifanim of kiyum mitzvah. So maybe by haseiba also, even though the chachamim were misaken that the haseiba should be together with matzah or dal cases, but that's only if a person is eating matzah and drinking dal cases. If he's not eating matzah or drinking dal cases, then he should do the haseiba as a inyan b'fnei atzma. So in the course of asking this question, the Rebbe says, the basis of the question is, Sharei mehada einei meise b'fnei rabbi, mashma da haseiba greida gamkin derech eirasu. Says, what's the basis of the question? If they were misaken haseba only b'shas achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases, maybe the haseba is only a derech chayros when it's together with achila shtiyah. Who says haseba b'fnei atzma has a benefit b'chal, even if the mitzvah of haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, but the only way it's possible to be mekayim that mitzvah, that chiyuv, is together with achila shtiyah. So if the person lepeil for whatever reason is not eating or drinking, he has no way of having that ma'ila of haseba. Who says there's any benefit? The Rebbe says that's not correct. Sharei meihad heb me'enei meise b'fnei rabbi mashmas deseba greda gamkin derech chayros. The fact that a person, Talmud b'fnei rabbi, doesn't do haseba is a raya that haseba is derech chayros, even haseba by itself. And the Rebbe fears this. Why doesn't it say this? Din in the Pesachim yishleimim nidlei shchicha klal. So this ha'ara is ton bir nesaf. What does this mean? Sharei meihad eine meise b'fnei rabbi mashmed haseba greda gamkin derech chayros. The Rebbe is proving, saying, Vaeira, what's the question? Maybe even according to this Sa'ad, the only time that Haseba shows on Chayros is when he eats or drinks by Haseba, does a psamais of Chayros by Haseba. And therefore, if he's not eating or drinking, there's no benefit. What's the gain of doing Haseba b'fnei atzma? Says the Rebbe, no. Even according to this Sa'ad, and even though the takana of Haseba was together with matzah and dal cases, but Haseba b'fnei atzma shows on Chayros. V'haraya, because a Talmud b'fnei rabbi doesn't do haseba. Why doesn't he do haseba? Haraya that haseba b'fnei atzma, haseba greda gamkin derech chayros. That's the pshat in this raya. That a Talmud b'fnei rabbi doesn't do haseba means he doesn't eat by haseba and he doesn't drink by haseba. It doesn't say anywhere anything besides that. That if the din of haseba is only by achila shtiyah, so the exclusion of a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from haseba is also only b'shas achilas matzah shtiyas dal cases. V'shteit b'chlal adin that he doesn't do haseba if he's not eating or drinking. So where do you see any raya or basis or mucker from the p'tur of a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from haseba that there's an inyan of chayros in a haseba, even if it's haseba greda, even if it's haseba that's not accompanying achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases? So if you look in the Moker Hadvarim, there's a little more Asius. In the Farbrengen Tafshin Chavtas. So there, in Sichos Chelek, says a whole other shtickli. So B'deichik loymar that ain't tzarich lasel lefi shacheres hamizbatis behaseba hu dafke kishu echel behaseba v'haseba sheini achel she'ein ima achila eina meira acheres v'yishchiva ba'alma. Says I would be able to say that haseba is not cheres. Haseba, you're lying down. Person lies in bed. It's not cheres. He sleeps at night. For haseba to be derech cheres is dafka when it's an achila with haseba. And in that case, I wouldn't have a basis for this whole nafkamina, for this whole shayla. The Rebbe says there, Hine ha'emes einay kain, al derech like it says in the Hara. V'gam haseba shaloi b'shas achila meira acheres. V'raya lazeh mima shemevur b'shulchan aruch da'eved l'fnei adonai v'talmud b'fnei rabbi lo yesebu ki aser linik cheres b'fnei adonai v'rabbi. The raya is from the din in Shulchan Aruch that a Eved and a Talmud l'fnei Rabbi don't do a seba. Olacheira bishleim is a Talmud mechuyev b'mitzvahs matzah. Af shegam zeh meira acherus move on dareyu din teira. V'lei akru davar zeh gam ibnei kavid harav. Chemuvam b'pashtas mima shekasav ish imei v'rav tiro. Bes Shabseise Tishmeir Shata V'Chayav B'Kvedi V'Aderechta B'Nidin Didan Ari Ata V'Rab Chayav B'Achilas Matzah V'Chein L'Peitri. Says you can't patra a Talmud L'Fnei Rabbi from Achilas Matzah. Mashenkin B'Negil L'Dal Kesi Shezeh Gufa Takanas Chachamim Halei Heimamru V'Heimamru V'Lomo L'Patru Es Ha'Eved Gam Mishtiyas Dal Kesi Shehu Inyan Shel Cheiros B'Fnei Rabbi. Umizem, and then it says in the Sichos Chelek says Chaser Ksas. ומזם מובן שלא ישתיע וכו' היא עניין אמר לחרס, אבל שדווקא הסבה היא תנועה פעולה של חרס. ולכן רק זה ביטלו בעבד. אך החרס שבדעת קייסס אין תנועה של חרס כל כך, sheyivatlu eisi b'fnei rabbi. So there's more over here. Even with the more, it's l'cheira needs a lot of beer, and it says chaser k'tzas, and in the Teiras Menachem seems to say the same exact words and the same cheshbon, and there it doesn't say that it's chaser k'tzas, so that's supposed to be considered more complete. Over here, it seems to be the vart like this. So the Rebbe says that there's a whole other piece over here to the Rai, a piece of the puzzle. The Rebbe says, l'cheira, matzah itself is cheirus, and dalet cases themselves are cheirus. So just like we say a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi doesn't do haseba, even though there's a mitzvah of haseba, but he doesn't do haseba because the chiyuv deiraisa of Meira, the Rabbi, is deiched haseba, kilu. So for the same reason, he also shouldn't do the matzah and the dalet cases. So meila matzah, there it brings ishim evav tiroat avavicha chayavim bekvede. Matzah is a mitzvah deiraisa. You can't be deiched the mitzvah of matzah, even though matzah is cheiros when he's b'fnei rabbi. But dalet cases is a derabanan, and the dalet cases itself shows on cheiros, just like haseba shows on cheiros. Why weren't they deiched dalet cases? Say hey mamru v'hei mamru, and a Talmud b'fnei rabbi shouldn't drink dalet cases, just like he doesn't drink haseba. Is a raya that the cheiros in dalet cases is not enough of is not a stira to covet rabbi that they should be deiched b'fnei rabbi. So still, what's the raya? Maybe the cheiros of dalet cases is not enough, is not a stira to covet rabbi, but the cheiros of haseba b'shas shtiyas dalet cases, that's already a stira to covet rabbi. But only haseba b'shas. Where do you see from here that haseba b'fnei atzmei is cheiros? But now that we have this extra piece of the raya, l'chayra, the raya will be like this: that haseba, we're going like the svara, haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzmei. But it says there's a mitzvah to do haseba because haseba shows in cheiros. When is the mitzvah to do haseba? When does haseba show in cheiros? When haseba is together with another maisa that shows in cheiros, which is either matzah or dalet cases, because matzah and dalet cases both have in them an inyan of cheiros. So when I combine the cheiros of the matzah or the dalet cases together with the cheiros of haseba, so then I'm fulfilling the extra mitzvah of haseba, of the cheiros of haseba. Dalet cases, even though it's a maisa of cheiros, it's not a cheiros that it's not enough of a cheiros to be a stira to covet rabbi, to make us say that Talmud b'fnei rabbi should be exempt from this cheiros. Chachamim could have pattered a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from dalet cases, just like they pattered him from haseba, and they didn't say that. Haste us that even though dalet cases is an inyan of cheiros, but it's not such a shleimus in cheiros. Now, so when I'm doing haseba b'shas dalet cases, that the maila in the haseba b'shas dalet cases is because dalet cases is a maila of cheiros. And they said that Seba should be a Maisa of Cheiros. And they said that Seba that shows on Cheiros should be together with a Maisa of Cheiros. It's obvious that the Iker indication of Cheiros is from, so there's a harkava of two inyanim over here, of the Cheiros of the dalet cases, and of the Cheiros of Seba, that comes together with the Cheiros of dalet cases. But the Cheiros of dalet cases itself is not such a big show of Cheiros. So when I have two separate inyanim, and one of them themselves is not such a big indication of cheiros that should be a stira to covet rabbi, and when they come together, they're a stira, must be it's because the cheiros of haseba is such a strong indication of cheiros that it's a stira to covet rabbi. So even though, they want this indication of cheiros to come together with a maisa of cheiros, but the cheiros shebazeh that causes the stira to covet rabbi, that because of that we say Talmud b'fnei rabbi shouldn't do haseba, is mitzad the haseba, not mitzad the dalet cases. That's l'cheira derai. From this, the Rebbe is proving this strong yisaid that Haseba itself is a indication of Cherus, and therefore, if you couldn't do the Shtiyas Dal cases, even though they wanted the Haseba, the Shleimus of Haseba together when it's with something else of Cherus, but that other thing doesn't have the main inyan of Cherus. And therefore, the main Cherus is the Haseba itself. And therefore, if you can't drink the Dal cases, you should still at least do the Haseba, because the Haseba at least have the Cherus. L'cheira, that's the Pshat in the Raya. I think it's still Ton Bir Nesaf. I want to just point out, having said this, the Rebbe says, according to two of the Ifanim, Yetzei Lanu Din Chadash, in the Sichos Chelek, in the Farbrengen itself. Just there, the Lashon is stronger. In the Sicha, in the Likkutei Sichos, it's Adayin Tzarechim. There it's Yetzei Lanu Din Chadash, which means it's clearly said as a third nafkamina. And another thing to point out, so the Rebbe Bavarans, L'cheira, if there comes out this nafkamina, which means this big Chiddush Din, so how come it's not mentioned in the Pesachim? Allah Alamaisa, that someone in Beis Asurim, V'chayetzi Bazah, Daf Tana Seba. So in the Sicha, it says a little, in the Ha'ara, in the Sicha that we just saw, so the Rebbe says the reason it doesn't say is Lo Shchicha Klal. In the Sicha, in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said two other reasons. One if in the Rebbe says Lefisha Emes Husha Seba Hitanai Ba'amatzah. This is a din that would come out late tzad, that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Then it should say, but maybe the Pesachim don't say this because they learn Haseba as a Tanai in the matzah. So this, l'cheira leit the maskana of the Sicha, that there's both dinim. We can't say this reason, because then Sof Kosof the Pesachim should have said Lefia Emes. Then you do have to say this Chiddush din with him. But the Rebbe says, Beis lefishu din pashat kol kach shein tzarech la'amre. It's pashat. If there's a mitzvah of Haseba, even though the takana is emos tzarech la'aseh b'shas achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases, but if someone is not doing that, there's still a mitzvah of Haseba. Right? Pashat u'shagam mishein le'lech ma'lech tzarech la'aseh. So in the Sicha, the Rebbe is saying a third reason why in the Ha'ara and the Sicha, because ain't a shchicha klal. But in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said two additional reasons and asbaris why it could be it's not mentioned in the Pesach. Now, in the second nafkamina that the Rebbe says, nafkamina, if he ate a kizayis matzah without Haseba, and then nishtana hamatzav be'efen sheshuv eine mechuyev be'haseba kegen she'achshav yeshiv hu lefnei rabbi. So when he ate the kizayis matzah without Haseba, so like we said, l'chol hadeis, he has to eat over the kizayis matzah. According to both studim in the Chakira, you have to eat over the kizayis matzah, either to be yetzer in mitzvahs matzah or to be yetzer in mitzvahs Haseba. But the nafkamina is if now he's yeshiv as a talmud yeshiv b'fnei rabbi who's pater from Haseba. So if the reason why he has to eat over the matzah is because he wasn't yetzer mitzvahs matzah, so he has to eat it over, even though now he's anyways going to eat it below Haseba. But if the first time he was yetzer mitzvahs matzah, he was just not yetzer mitzvahs Haseba, and now he's anyways not going to eat by Haseba, so then there's no point in eating over the matzah. In Ha'ara 13, the Rebbe says it could be that even if you say he wasn't yetzer mitzvahs matzah, but he's still not going to be mechuyev to eat the matzah over, because the reason why there was a problem with his mitzvahs matzah was because of the lack of Haseba, because there was a t'nai matzah of Haseba. If he's now also not going to eat it Haseba, le'yaviach klum. And the Rebbe brings from Yalav Yaveh. By Yalav Yaveh, it's there's a din if you forget Yalav Yaveh on Rosh Chodesh, you have to daven over Shemini Esrei. There is pashat l'cheira that it's not that the Shemini Esrei is a prat in Yalav Yaveh. The Yalav Yaveh is a prat in Shemini Esrei. That if you're missing the Yalav Yaveh in a Shemini Esrei that's supposed to have Yalav Yaveh, is that's felt in the Shemini Esrei. He wasn't yetzer the chiyuv of davening Shemini Esrei. Nevertheless, and therefore you have to daven over Shemini Esrei. Nevertheless, if in the second Shemini Esrei he's also going to be missing Ya'aleh v'Yaver, because the second Shemini Esrei will be at night when it's no longer a Chodesh, so then there's no point in davening over Lo Yarviach Klum. The same thing, says the Rebbe, you could say a svara by matzah. So in Ha'ara 14, the Rebbe says on this, Va'afim timtza loimar, shemikivan shekvar chala lav chiyav haseba kedem sheba l'rabbi, muchayiv hu lachzer acher his damnus l'kaya mitzvahs haseba, nafkamina ba'ofen shi efsher lo'yoid l'kaya mitzvahs haseba leilech milifnei rabbi kegen shirabbi tzarech le'v'chayitzi baz. The Rebbe says, maybe you could say a svara that over here he's going to have to go away from Rabbi and be Mekayim mitzvahs haseba because he was already mechuyev in haseba. So the ha'ara is Omer Dershuni. What's the pshat? Well, it means there would be a way to say that the tzadei hachakira, the tzadei hanafkemina is that since now he's yeshev l'fnei Rabbi, he bechlal is not mechuyev to do haseba. He's pater behaseba. Or no, he was already mechuyev in haseba. Maybe he has to leave and go do haseba, and it's not an nafkamina. The nafkamina is in a case where there's no longer a possibility of doing haseba. There's no longer a possibility of going away from Rabbi. So, what's these two eifanim that the Rebbe addresses, or is miramis to very, very bekitzer? One possibility to touch up this ha'ara is by Talmud HaYeshev L'fnei Rabbi, who's pater from haseba, v'chayetze bazeh, who are pater from haseba. There's two ways at looking at this patur from haseba. One way to look at it is they're pater from haseba because the kavod Rabbi is deicha the din of haseba. Haseba is cherus. The din of kavod Rabbi is deicha the chiyuv of haseba, and b'meila he's pater from haseba. And the same thing, the others that are pater from haseba, because the kavod or the chiyuvim that they have is deicha haseba. Al derech, like the svara that says in Rishonim about the patur of nashim by a mitzvah sasei shazman grama, that her chiyuv shibud lebaila is ki'ilu deicha the chiyuv in these mitzvahs. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that at Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, because he has this chiyuv of kavod Rabbi, b'meila he's not mechuyev in haseba. The Chachamim, the Rebbe brought in the Farbrengen of Tavshin Chavtas that I mentioned earlier, the Rebbe brought the lashon hey mamru v'hey mamru. In the question why they didn't say it by Dal cases. But a svara to say that the Chachamim were mechayev haseba in such a case. Or you could say there's a svara by Isha that ain't a tzricha haseba, Isha b'fnei baila, that the vart is that it's not a chisaron in derech cherus. Without haseba is the same derech cherus. By Talmud l'fnei Rabba, you could say the haseba there's no chiyuv haseba, because the haseba doesn't add to the derech cherus, because since he's yeshev l'fnei Rabbi, the yeshev is a complete derech cherus. We're not being deichet. There's a kiyum of derech cherus without haseba. When common nafkaminas, and could be it's a machlekes paiskim, these two ways in how to understand the Gemara. But a kopanim could be benegeya linyanenu. So if you would say that a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, the chiyuv haseba is nitcha, the kavod Rabbi is ndeicha the chiyuv haseba, so then l'chayra would come out that a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, so since he's b'fnei Rabbi, so when he ate the matzah, there was no chiyuv haseba, because he's yeshev l'fnei Rabbi. The chiyuv kavod Rabbi took precedence over the chiyuv haseba. He's not mechuyev in haseba. Masha'en kain, if he already ate matzah before he was yeshev l'fnei Rabbi and became mechuyev in haseba, so even though now when he comes b'fnei Rabbi, the kavod Rabbi is deicha, now the chiyuv haseba, But the chiyuv that was already chal on him, he still has to be mekayim. Masha'en kain, if I would learn the other eifin, that the Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, b'shas he's yeshiv l'fnei Rabbi, there's no chiyuv haseba. It's not that the haseba is nitcha, but there's no din of haseba. He's not missing the derech cherus by not having haseba. Or like there's a yisay to say by nashim that this is the complete derech cherus. There's no extra cherus. There's no inyan haseba doesn't add to his cherus. So then I would have to say that even though he was yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi, even though he ate the matzah before he was yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi, and he was already nischayev b'haseba, but now that he's yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi and he's pater from haseba, there's no chiyuv, there's nothing missing in haseba. There would be no mokim to be mechayev him, to be mishtadel, to leave Rabbi, to go away from Rabbi, to be mekayim the din of haseba. So that could be the tut stadim, va'afim tim salema, that the ha'ara gives a makim to tut stadim, whether we could say that the fact that he started to eat matzah before he came b'fnei Rabbi is mechayev him to be mishtadel to do the seba, even though now he's yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi by going away from Rabbi. So the Rebbe leaves that as a suffix, because maybe this is totally in these two ifanim. Lahoyer, there's a question which Mefarshim really address. Talmud b'fnei Rabbi is pater from haseba, so every Talmud should have a chiyuv to go away from Rabbi, to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba. Mefarshim asked that, I think in the some achreinim say Likkutei Sichos, I think says that from this you see the big importance of l'kakbel pnei Rabbi b'regel. That even though through that he's not able to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba, still it's chayiv l'hakbel pnei Rabbi b'regel. But that question could be totally in these two eifanim of whether the haseba b'fnei Rabbi is dechuya or hutra. But akapanim, the Rebbe in the Ara seems to say no. Even if it's dechuya, but if you're melchatchila l'fnei Rabbi, so this chiyuv was melchatchila nitcha. It was never chal on you, because when you ate the matzah, you weren't mechuyev. There's no chiyuv to be mishtadel, to be mekayim b'seba, like it's mashma b'pashtos. But if I was already mechuyev in it, and now it's being nitcha, then I would for sure have this chiyuv to leave, to find the opportunity, even to be mekayim the mitzvah. Mashakin, if it's hutra, then maybe even if I was mechuyev already, I wouldn't have this chiyuv. So that's l'chayra what the hara leaves two eifanim, but akapanim, even though you could say two eifanim in the nafkamina, but in such a case where even al yidei hishtadlus, he has no possibility of being mekayim, of eating matzah shaloi b'fnei Rabbi, kegoin sherabi tzrichalei, and whatever eifin. So there I would still have the nafkamina. That's b'derech efsher to Taicha Para 14. Another point, so in the first nafkamina that the Rebbe says in the Pnim, whether you are yetze matzah and you're eating over the matzah in order to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba, or you weren't yetze mitzvahs matzah, so that's not a nafkamina l'maisa like the Rebbe says, because according to both svaras l'peil, you have to eat over the matzah. The nafkamina l'alacha l'maisa, the Rebbe says, would be maybe b'negea to the bracha, whether you have to eat a alachilas matzah. And like we said before, the Rebbe in the Ha'ara, in Ha'ara 12, says that even that nafkamina you could say is only me'ikra din, but not l'maisa, because we could be saying l'alacha, you would be, since it's a suffix, you would be saying mechanderaviyah, who says bisman azeh, we don't have to do haseba. So just one Ha'ara on this that I saw, that you could say nafkamina l'maisa, l'alacha l'maisa, l'chayra, even in this nafkamina, and whether you're eating over the matzah to be mekayim mitzvahs matzah, or you're eating over matzah and it's b'chlal not a mitzvah of matzah, it's just to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba. So I saw in a kavitz from the Belz of Kalil, and over there someone wrote a whole inyan about this shaila of someone who ate without haseba, and then he remembered and he has to eat it over, he's Yeshev Lifnei Rabbi. This Tapakti he writes, which is the Nafkamin and the Sicha, and he goes and he brings the Griz, and he writes a number of the Ha'aris and the Sicha on the Rayas of the Griz, and basically made a whole shtickle Teira out of the Sicha, with mentioning only the Griz. But there he says a few svaras, and one of them he says a nafkamina. If someone ate the matzah below haseba, so he has to eat a nukazayis matzah, he reminded himself after he ate the morer. So he has to eat over the kazayis matzah. If this kazayis matzah is just to be mekayim the mitzvahs haseba, so he'll eat the kazayis matzah and continue with the seder. But if he wasn't Yetze Matzah the first time, so he's even eating over the Kazayis Matzah to be Yetze Mitzvahs Matzah. The Seder on Pesach has to be Kefi HaSeder, that the first Matzah and the Morer you eat after the Matzah. So then Yesh Leimer, that after he eats the Matzah, he'll have to eat over also Morer to eat Ala Seder, because the first Matzah that he ate wasn't a Kiyum Mitzvahs Matzah. So these are, the Rebbe brings the Chakira, the Rebbe says the Nafkaminas, and the Rebbe brings the Rayas, starting from Ois Gimel in the Sikha. So the first Raya the Rebbe brings, that Haseba is a Tnai and Achilas Matzah, and not just a Matzah is a Tnai and the Haseba. It's from the Gemara, that the Gemara says, Hashamesh ha'achal kizayis Matzah, kishehu meisiv yatza, meisivin loy meisiv loy. So the Gemara is midayek dafka if the shamish is meisiv, he's yetza. If he's not meisiv, he's not yetza. Mizem mashma, says the Rebbe, that when you ate matzah b'lei haseba, you're not yetza, you deichevas matzah. Shaila is, what's pshat in the Gemara kishehu meisiv yatza? So the Rebbe says, to say meisiv yatza means mitzvahs haseba is a deiche gadol. The MK Maika Mashmalam Beloshem Meisiv in Loy Meisiv Loy. Hare Pshita de Kashalei Heisiv Loy Yatza Chayvas HaSeba. Must be he's being mechadish that Loy Heisiv, he wasn't Yetza Mitzvahs Matzah. Das heißt the Gemara sagt Mefurish Vidit Tzad in the Chakira. So just to give the full picture, so in the Griz, he wants to say this Gemara is the Raya of the Rambam. This Gemara is the Mocker of the Rambam. Just Keshu Meisiv Yatza is mashma that the Shamish, when he ate the Kazayis Matzah Beseba, he's Yatza. He was Yetza B'diavad. It's mashma that there was something else that he was supposed to do, but he was Yetzak upon him. Not that he did everything he was supposed to. Otherwise, what's the Lashon Yatza? Yatza is mashma B'diavad. From here, he says the Rambam learns that Ba'ames HaSeba is a separate din that you should do the whole time. B'chol HaSuda you should do HaSeba. It's just him Hasiv, the Shamish, if he was Mesiv, just by the Kazayis Matzah, he's Yetz. Mela, the Gemara is talking about Yatza Mitzvahs HaSeba, and fakert from the fact that he was Yetz only B'diavad is a raya that B'lechatchila as a Reza Meshubach, he should be Mesa B'chol HaSuda. First of all, that pshat is difficult be'etzem, because if Yatzav B'diavad, that means that the Heseba B'chol HaSuda is not something that Hareza Meshubach, it's something L'chatchila that the mitzvah itself is Mechayiv. You were only B'diavad Yetza if you weren't Mesa B'chol HaSuda. What's the pshat? That B'Mesa B'chol HaSuda Reza Meshubach. But the pshat in the Gemara says already in the Taz. The Rebbe in the Sicha in Ha'ara 24, where the Rebbe speaks about this inyan of Mesa B'chol HaSuda, he brings the Ramah, or Re'ei B'Taz Sifkat and Vav. The Rebbe is mitzayin to the Taz in Sifkat and Vav. The Taz in Sifkat and Vav starts the other way. That it says, what does it mean? L'chatchila Yosef B'chol HaSuda says from the fact that the Gemara says Hashamesh Achal Kazayis Matzah Kashumeisiv Yatza, Dafka the Shamash is Yetza, is mashma that every person is not Yetza unless he's Meisiv B'chol HaSuda. He says the Iker Pshat that Yatza Kashumeisiv Yatza, even though he wasn't Meisiv the whole Suda, Says in the Taz, Elamai, the Taz asks, is mashma that a regular person wasn't even Yetzer if he wasn't Meisav B'chol HaSuda. And the Taz for emphasis. But this whole pshat that he wants to say like the Rambam, that Kishu Meisav Yatsa is the Chiddush, that even though he wasn't Meisav B'chol HaSuda, and from here we have a mocker that Be'etzem you have to be Meisav B'chol HaSuda, and that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, doesn't address the diuk that the Rebbe makes. That's being medayik Meisav Yatsa. What's the Chiddush of Meisav Yatsa, and why Yatsa only b'diavad? The Rebbe says, you see the Gemara is medayik loy Meisav loy. That if he wasn't Meisav, he wasn't Yatsa. That means from the Gemara that there's a Chiddush in loy Heisav loy Yatsa, and that's where the Rebbe says is a deiche gadol. To be talking about mitzvahs haseba, it must be talking about mitzvahs matzah, and that's why from the Gemara is muchach that if you ate matzah b'lei haseba, you're not yitz. And the Rebbe brings further that so from the Gemara is a strong raya, even though you could try to faremfer it b'deiche gadol, but the raya is stronger from the Rosh. From the Rosh, you see that he learned like that pshat in the Gemara, because the Rosh has a suffix by the cases. And he brings a raya from this Gemara that what you ate or drank b'lei haseba, you're not yitza. Meisavin loy meisav loy. And the Rosh says because of that, says beferish that because of that he learns the din that the kais that you drank without a seba is einei miminyan hakaises. In Ha'ara 18, the Rebbe brings the asvara that maybe you would say a chiluk between dalet cases and matzah, that by dalet cases, kivan shu midrabanan makeves by haseba the heimamru v'heimamru. Since dalet cases is a din drabanan, so if you drank the dalet cases without a seba, it takes away from the whole dalet cases, and you're not yetzer. You weren't Mekayim mitzvahs dalet cases. But by matzah is a deiraisa. So the whole derabbanon, even if you say that the Rabbanon made a takana, that a seba is a prat in dalet cases, but it shouldn't take away the kiyum ha-mitzvah, because the mitzvah is a mitzvah deiraisa. So the Rebbe says you would be able to say that mitzvara, but you can't say that in the Rosh. Right? The Rosh ein lachalek, because the Rosh is saying this din by dalet cases, his makir is from the din, from the Gemara that we just mentioned, Meisav in loy Meisav loy, that's benegeh to matzah. So then al karchach, the Rosh who's saying that it's ma'akev is saying this side by matzah, side by dalet cases. But misvara as the Rebbe says, you would be able to make such a chiluk between matzah and dalet cases. So possibly, so there's a famous taisvis, like we bring this yisaid of not being yetzer. B'diavad is from the Rosh, and it's partially from Teisvis. In Teisvis and Psachim, the Gemara has a shaila, which of the dalet cases need a seba? And the Gemara says, "Maskana mitzad safek kulunami tzrichim haseba." Yeah, the famous Gemara. So Teisvis kulunami tzrichim haseba. Teisvis v'chol dalet cases tzrichim haseba b'shas shtia. Yeah, separate in you. V'tzarech iyon im shachach v'lo yhesiv im yachser v'yishta v'chein im bekais shlishi lo yhesiv im yachal lachser v'lishtes b'aseba af agav de ben shlishi l'rvi lo yishta. So Teisvis adds this as a shaila by dalet cases. This din that the Rosh says b'pshitos, except by kais shlishi, the Rosh also has the shaila, but the etzem hadin that when you miss Taseba, you have to do it over. Teisva seems to say this as a suffix. But Teisva says this suffix by dalet cases. Teisva doesn't say this suffix by matzah, which is a shaila on what's pshat in Teisva. What's the suffix, and why is the suffix by dalet cases? Was it by matzah pashut that you have to do it over if you did it shalei b'aseba? By Kais Shlishi, where Teisvis has a suffix, yes, because by Kais Shlishi there's a problem doing it over, Mashenkin by Matzah. But Teisvis originally has a suffix by all the cases, even the cases where there's no problem of a chash of nira k'meisif ala cases drinking it over. That's the first part of Tesis' suffix. So why does he have a suffix by the Dalet cases more than by Matzah? So one way to explain Tesis could be based on the svara of the Rebbe over here in the Ha'ara, even though the Rebbe says that's for sure not the svara Sarash, but that could be taka the svara of Tesis, that by Matzah, that's a Deiraisa, you can't say that you're not Yetzah. So it's a Deiraisa. So therefore, if you did it without a Seiba, al karch of the mitzvah of Matzah, you were Yetzah. The Alt cases, which is a Derabanan, hey mamu vei mambru, v'meila Tesis has as a Tzarachiyim. Earlier in the Sikha, just to l'shleimus opinion of this point, is matzah zaderaisa. Because of this, the Rebbe said, when the Rebbe brought the original Chakira, that even according to the tzad, that matzah without heseba you're not yetzah, it's only midrabanan that you're not yetzah. So in Ha'ara 10, the Rebbe said, the deiche gadol leimar de ba'achal b'lei heseba afkua rabbanan shetzivu lahasef migeder achilas mitzvah v'leikia mitzvah achilas matzah min atera. Would be a deichik to say that you're not yetzah matzah min atera. But this is all, even according to the tzad, that there's no difference between matzah and dalet cases. By both of them, you're not yetzah. We could say, nevertheless, that there's a nafkamina that by dalet cases you wouldn't be yetzah midrabanan, so you're not yetzah b'chlal, because the whole dalet cases is the drabanan. By matzah, you would be yetzah min atera. You would just not be yetzah midrabanan. But the Rebbe in this ha'ara Ki'ilu Bavarans, that there would be a mokim to say another svara, that by matzah you're not yetzah even midiraisa, but that would be a deiche gadol. That since the Rabbana made a mitzvah of a seba, so maybe you would say that you're not even yetzah midiraisa. So the svara is found in some achreinim, just to give the shleimus ha'inyan, that there could be a mocking to say that even though Heseba is a derabban, so in the end of this Ha'ara, of Ha'ara 10, the Rebbe brings the Eir Cheschayim, Sheish Smach LaSeba Min HaTeira. Kilu, the Rebbe is saying, if I would say that's tzad, that Heseba is Min HaTeira, then I would be able to say that you're not Yetzah even Min HaTeira. But if it's derabbanan, it's a deiche gadol to say that mitzad missing a din derabbanan, you're not Yetzah deiraisa. But the fact that there's a possibility of saying that, it's just a deiche gadol, is l'cheira. We find this svara in a number of places. Avuhin, l'cheira is the Teisvis and Sukkah, that Daf Gimel, the Teisvis brings a svara that if someone is Yeshev Reishev V'Rubei B'Sukkah V'Shulchanei B'Seich HaBayis, that even though it's a chesaron d'Rabbanan, nevertheless it could be that he's not Yetzah Yidei Chevasei Min HaTeira. So, and we find, so that's the main example. You could find sometimes the Rabbanan made their takana in ha'efen that if you aren't mekayim the din according to the tanam of the Rabbanan, you're not even Yetzah Min HaTeira. By Kriya Shema, there's such a svara that the Chachamim made a gzeira that Kriya Shema has to be dafka ad chatzais, and if someone didn't fulfill it according to the takanas Chacham, he's not Yetzah mitzvahs Kriya Shema the Rabbanan. He's not Yetzah Kriya Shema even Min HaTeira, according to some Rishonim. So we find this in some places, but over here the Rebbe is saying l'cheira that it's a deiche gadol, even though it's possible to be such a thing. We find sometimes such takanas d'Rabbanan, but it would be a deichik to say that the takanas haseba d'Rabbanan should be oiked in mitzvah min HaTeira. Nevertheless, al kapanim, it could be oiked d'Rabbanan. But here in this ha'ara that we're learning now in ha'ara to 18, the Rebbe says because of this, because matzahs deiraisa, they can't be acred completely. That would give some basis to say that maybe by matzah taka they aren't acred at all. because the matzah you can't be aker completely. But the kadal cases that's the rabbanan himamru veimamru, they're aker the mitzvah. So misvara you would be able to say. The Rebbe says in the Rush for sure you can't say that, but possibly that svara could explain the tzarachian of teisvus and psachim dafka b'negia to dalet cases. So the Rebbe brings the raya from the Gemara, even though the Rebbe says that you could find for it b'doiche gadol, a clearer raya in the Rush, mefurish adavar b'Rush, and after that the Rebbe brings a meredike raya from the Yerushalmi. Whatever I saw who speaks about it, I didn't see anyone bring this raya from the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, Yotzim b'matzav ben kiven ben shaloi kiven, mi kiven shehesef chazake kiven. That by matzah, if a person doesn't know if he had kavanah or not, since he did haseba, then you say for sure he also had kavanah, milchatchila, and he wasn't thinking about it b'shas da'achila, v'nigrer hu achar machshavtei harishena. The question is, what does it mean, mikivan shehisif? Who says he had a seba? He didn't have kavanah, maybe he didn't have a seba either. Like the Rebbe says, v'adrab mistaber shegam lo yhesiv. It should have said, im hesiv, chazak kivan. What does it mean, mikivan shehesiv? Is a raya from the Yerushalmi that without haseba you're not yetzer matzah, and b'meila haseba there had to be, otherwise you wouldn't be yetzer matzah. The Rebbe says you could be deicha this raya. Geshloimar dein tzarich lefarish im hesiv. Mikivan shehesiv is like saying if you did haseba then mikivan shehesiv. But the pashtus mashma Yerushalmi, the fact that it says mikivan shehesiv and it doesn't say im hesiv, that it can't be that he didn't do a seiba, as mashma like the tzad, that without a seiba you weren't yitzah mitzvahs matzah, and therefore a seiba is lo yimoli, it is not possible that he didn't do a seiba. With this, the Rebbe in Ha'ara 23 says, Lefiza move on heitev nocha meir dikevar that shtims. The Rebbe brought earlier the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, Oisei kizayis matzah, Shehu Adam Yetze by Pesach Tzarech LaOchlei Meisif. That the Haseba has to be by the Kizayis Matzah Shehu Yetze Ba B'Yidei Chivas. L'chaira, why the Kizayis Matzah Shehu Yetze Ba B'Yidei Chivas? If I say that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, and even though they were misakin it by matzah, you have to say, since you could eat matzah over b'haseba to be mashlim, and the second matzah that you eat is the chnishkin kiyum mitzvahs matzah, because matzah you're yetzer, you have to say that it's lav dafke the matzah that is yetzer b'yidei chivase. It's any matzah, because it's the ma'isa achilas matzah. So the Rebbe said in that Yerushalmi you would have to say that that's talking about al derech haragel. Because since the haseba that they were misakin by matzahs, the first matzah that you eat right away has to have haseba. The first matzah that you eat is usually the matzah that you eat by yidei chivase. It's just that if you blepeil didn't do haseba, so you could still fulfill the haseba with any ma'isa of achilas matzah, even though it's not the kiyum mitzvah achilas matzah. Hastas that both of these Yerushalmis are be'etzem arayet to the tzad. The fact that the Yerushalmi says that the matzah shu yitze by yidei chivase needs a seiba is a raya to the tzad that matzah a seiba is a prat nachilas matzah, but you could be deicha the raya because you could say it's al derech haragel. The Rebbe didn't bring this raya when the Rebbe went through the different rayas, because already in Ha'ara 11 he farem for the raya, right? As part of explaining what does it help to eat other matzah, and he faremfered how that shtims with the Yerushalmi, so he faremfered the raya, but bepashtos that the Yerushalmi is toila the din of a seiba with the matzah sheyetze yidei chivase is mashma like tzad, that a seiba is a prat nechilas matzah. The same thing the other Yerushalmi that says kivan shehesiv chazake kivan is mashma bepashtos, even though you could be deicha, it's mashma bepashtos like the tzad that without a seiba, you're not yetzer mitzvahs matzah. So in Ha'ara 23, the Rebbe says, according to this, both Yerushalmis you could faremfer, but both Yerushalmis are bepashtos mashma that Haseba is a prat in mitzvahs matzah, so it stems that the Yerushalmi is l'shitase, that since the Yerushalmi bepashta says kivon shehesev that it's a prat in matzah, so therefore the Haseba has to be by the matzah sheyetze by yidei chivase, because that was the whole takanas chachamim, that the way to be yetze mitzvahs matzah is with Haseba, so therefore the other Yerushalmi says matzah sheyetze by yidei chivase. And the Rebbe finishes off a Rei Ha'ara Hanal, that the Rebbe said, yeah, Taka, you could for the Raya from that Yerushalmi. Just like over here, the Rebbe said you could for the Raya from this Yerushalmi. But both Yerushalmis are mashma more like this Sad, and it's Yuvan Heita. They fit with each other. I just want to point out in this, I said that there's also the Griz al Ashas, discusses this Inyan, that's brought down in the Haggadah Mi Beis Levi, the first Haggadah Mi Beis Levi, Omid Pei Zayin. And there, the Griz brings this Yerushalmi, the first Yerushalmi, the one in Ha'ara 11, not this last one about Kivan Shehesiv. The Yerushalmi that Oisa Kezayis Sha'adam Yetze B'yidei Chivasei Tzarech La'oichloi Meisiv. And somehow he brings a raya from this Yerushalmi to the other tzad, that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Because im noimar, they call ikar din Hesev, who bekiyum ha-mitzvah d'achilas matzah. If you would say Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah, then what does it say? Oisei matzah sheyetze oisei kezayis. Pshita, of course that's where you need Haseba, because afterwards, if it's a prat in matzah, it's not shaykh to any other matzah that you eat, because any other matzah that you eat is not a mitzvah of matzah. So al korchach the gamba oisei kezayis, it's a din b'fnei atzmei of Haseba, and therefore you would be, it's be'etzem, there has a place by the whole Suda, like the Rambam says, and therefore the Yerushalmi has to be medayik that the chiyuv is dafka by oisei kezayis she'adam yetze by yidei chivase. That's what he says over there. Very hard for me to understand that raya, that it should be a raya gur to the other tzad. The question that he says, why does the Yerushalmi have to say oisei kezayis she'adam yetze by yidei chivase? Bepashtas, that's up to Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi is being magdir, and that's why the Rebbe learns bepashtas that the Yerushalmi is a raya to the tzad that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah. Elamai, the Rebbe says you could be deicha that it's al derech haragim. But the bepashtas does up the Yerushalmi, that the chiyuv Haseba is not a chiyuv b'fnei atzmei, that lefiza could be by any part of the Suda. It's a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah. And therefore, when is this takana of Haseba by oisei kezayis shadam yetze by yidei chivase? Hagufa, that's statement, that's the kamat mefurish in the Yerushalmi. Can farem from the Yerushalmi, but if there's a raya from the Yerushalmi, it's to the tzad that Haseba is a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah. And that's why the Rebbe says over here in Ha'ara 23 that the muvan heitev, that Yerushalmi is muvan heitev according to this Yerushalmi from both Yerushalmis is bepashtas ahichacha that this sad the chakira that Haseba is a. Just want to say one more ha'ara in this sikha, even though there's Eila Mole and Asach Merz who stellen sich. The Rebbe says from the Gemara, from the Rosh, there's the rayas that Haseba is a prat in matzah and a prat in the alt cases. Le'idach, be'ikir from the din of Haseba, from the Yisei din of Haseba, the tam v'chiyav Haseba, that b'chol der v'der chayav adam laharis esatzme ki'ilu hu ba'atzme yatsa atem mishibr mitzrayim lefichach k'shesayed adam balayla zet tzarech lecha v'lishtis v'meisev derech cherus. The chayav laharis esatzme is a chiyav b'fnei atzme, so must be Haseba as a chiyav b'fnei atzme. And in Ha'ara 29, the Rebbe said the reason why the Rambam says the reason for the mitzvah is in order to be magdir that Haseba is a chiyav b'fnei atzme. So since there's rayas to both studim, so the Rebbe says lemaskana, there's two dinim in Haseba. There's a takanas Haseba that the Chachamim were misakin as a tanai in the oifen kiyum mitzvahs matzah and kiyum mitzvahs dal cases that they have to be by Haseba. And there's a din in Haseba that's a inyan b'fnei atzmei, And this the inyan b'fnei atzmei of a seiba is also niskayim through that the matzah and the dal cases is b'seiba. And with this, the Rebbe for emphasize varies the yukim. First, just to explain in this a little bit, what's the pshat? L'cheira kumtei tzvei bazundere dinim. It says one takana of heseba, and the shaila was what's pshat in heseba, and the Rebbe brings the different eyes. Says this the takana of heseba, it's a takana in matzah, and it's a takana, a separate takana of heseba. It's still l'cheira. The word is yisoidam echad. The takana of heseba is that the Chachamim said that on Pesach, the laharis esatzme kilu hu yotzab mitzrayim, this showing, feeling, and reliving and re-experiencing Yetzias Mitzrayim has to come out in the way that we feel the way we show ourselves in Agashmis the Kemaisa by the Leil HaSeder Midrabanan, and that's the din of Haseba. Is in them is that zwei Sachen. B'meil this yisoid that the laharis as atzma is to be leficha k'shesayid comes out in two pratim. Number one, so therefore there's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma of heseba. There's a din that I have to show. I have to conduct myself with heseba in order to be laharis as atzma kiluhu ba'atzma yotza b'mitzrayim. Because the Chachamim were misaken that that's the way to show my personal reliving and feeling of chayros. However, now that the Chachamim were misaken, that the way to show chayros is with heseba, and that's why there's this mitzvah b'fnei atzma b'heseba of heseba. But from that is mistaif nachadin that are coming from the same yesod. That those mitzvahs b'layla zeh, that in Yonam is chayros, which is matzah and dalit kaises, that the reason for eating matzah minatera is the chazecher lecheiros, and dalit kaises is zecher lecheiros, or I'll kapanim two of them, depending on what the pshat, the suffix of the Gemara is over there. But those mitzvahs that in Yanam is cheiros, and the takanas chachamim of heseba is that the cheiros of Pesach has to come out in a maisa bepeil of heseba. So besides this mitzvah b'fnei atzma of heseba to show cheiros, mitzad this takanas chachamim, that the cheiros on Pesach has to be mizbata, darf sich herausweisen in a peula of heseba, liegt doch in them that those mitzvahs, that the mitzvah, which is matzah and dal kesas, has to be an inyan of cheiros, in order to be yetza that mitzvah, which means to be yetza that achilas matzah should be an inyan of cheiros. Also, according to this takanas chachamim, muzdach the achilas matzah zayin be'aseba. Because otherwise, besides that you're missing the show of cheiros, you didn't do the matzah kedebai, because the part of the dinei matzah is the matzah has to be a zeicher lecheiros, and the takana of haseba is that haseba is the way to show cheiros, and the same thing with dal cases. So there's the two dinim that be yisaydam echad, even though they're two separate halachas, but it's all part of the hagdar of the chachamim that the laharis asatz mekilu hu yatsa mitzrayim zok sechareis in the lefichach kishusay tzarach lecha v'lishtes v'meisav derech cheiros. So that's the yisay, that's the chiddush of the sicha, that there's two dinim, two chiyuvim in haseba, mitzvah b'fnei atzmei and tanai b'mitzvah sachilas matzah. So, in Ha'ara 31, there's a question with three answers, and I don't understand the first two answers, and I'm going to leave it for the Ten L'Chacham V'Yech Kameid. So the Rebbe said the Rambam also learns, the Rebbe is learning, this is according to all the days, all the shittas, everyone learns there's these two dinim in Haseba, the Rambam and the Rosh. Everyone holds of the two dinim. And with these two dinim, the Rebbe faremfert the diyukim in the Rambam. In the end of Ha'ara 31, the Rebbe asks, Umashalei Kosaf HaRambam Shem Lo Yochal HaKezayis Matzah Be'Seba Tzarech Lachzer La'ochlei Af Shesvir Lei Sheheseba Higam T'nai B'Mitzvahs Matzah Yesh Leimar. B'chayra, as later Rambam is Haseba T'nai in Matzah. So how come if it's a Tanaya matzah, then you have to eat over the matzah? Now, the Rebbe said in the Sikha, the Hanocha of the Sikha is that even if a Seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, you still have to eat over the matzah. But that's what we say, la halacha l'maisa, that says you have to eat over the matzah. That halacha l'maisa is true according to both studies. Maybe that's not muchach to say according to the Rambam. The Rambam B'chlal doesn't say this din that you have to eat over the matzah. So the Rebbe says three answers. If the Rambam holds of both dinim, so why doesn't the Rambam say this din that you have to eat over the matzah, that you weren't yetsa matzah if I ate matzah below yasema? Yesh loymar le kol atanaim shebemitzvahs or shebematzahs hem leikuva. Even if the Rambam agrees that Heseba is also a Tanai in Achilas Matzah, but that doesn't mean that the Rambam has to hold of the din that if I ate matzah without Heseba, I wasn't Yetza. And like the Rebbe learns earlier, that L'chol days, even if I wasn't Yetza, it's only Midrabana, but Akapana Midrabana, I wasn't Yetza. Lav Dafka, could be I missed certain Tanaim, but the Tanai is not Likuva, which means I was still Yetza. 2. Second answer, Meklali Rambam Sheini Mevi Dinim Shleihuskru B'Shas. Even if the Rambam holds of this halacha, this nafkamina halacha, and holds that since a seba is also a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah, so if you ate matzah without a seba, bist du nicht yetza. But that's a din was steht nicht befeirish in Gemara. The Rambam doesn't bring dinim that lehuskru b'shas. And 3, b'deichek rimza bis perek zayin sefer halacha ches, that maybe the Rambam is meramis to this halacha. So, if the Rambam is holds of the halacha and is meramis to the halacha, then it's very good, and it's triumphant. But the first two answers, the Rebbe says maybe the Rambam B'chlal doesn't hold of the halacha, or he holds of the halacha, but it's a mechudish dika halacha, it's not mentioned in Shas. L'chaira, what's the raya that even according to the Rambam, Haseba is not only a din bifnei atzmei, but it's also a prat in achilas matzah? What's the basis to say that? Because we have a rayas that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah. What's the rayas that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah? It's a tnai in achilas matzah. So that the Rebbe said in Sif Gimel. So there was the raya from the Yerushalmi. Perhaps that's the raya. Come to that. But the raya that the Rebbe brought was the raya from the Gemara and the raya from the Rosh. So the raya that we're saying from in the Shittas HaRambam, the hechrech that the Rambam holds like that, has to be the raya from the Gemara. What's the raya from the Gemara? Because the Gemara said, Hasham ha'sha'achal kezayis matzah, kishu meisev yatza, meisev in loy, meisev loy. The Rebbe was medayik. It must be when the Gemara says meisev yatza, loy meisev loy yatza. We're talking about the mitzvahs matzah. Heißt das, as steht in Gemara, loy yatza mitzvahs matzah. If you're going to say that the Rambam doesn't hold of this din, because some Tanaim are not liikuva, if the Tanai is not liikuva, but then al karchach the Rambam, you're going to have to say is learning meisev yatza, loy meisev loy yatza, doesn't mean loy yatza mitzvahs matzah, because the Rambam is learning that this Tanai in matzah is not liikuva. How is the Rambam learning the Gemara? Maybe the Rebbe will say the Rambam is learning the Gemara like the Deiche Gadol that the Rebbe said, that Heisev Yatza is Yetza Mitzvah Saseba, that the Rebbe says that Deiche Gadol, because what does it mean, Lo Heisev Lo Yatza? But Akapanim, that this answer, number one, that this Tanai is not Liikuva, is going to have to learn that according to the Rambam, the Rambam is learning different this Gemara. If the Rambam is learning different this Gemara, then Tzirik, what's the basis to say according to the Rambam that there's two dinim? Then who says according to the Rambam Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah? The whole hechrech is from the Gemara. Zakstudach as the Rambam learned the Gemara anders. Because if the Rambam is not learning that Gemara different, then you can't say aliba de harambam that this is a Tanai that's not likuva val. The Gemara state klar as is yeah likuva val loy heisev yatza heisev loy heisev loy. Elamai, you're going to say No, the Rambam maybe learns the Gemara like the Deiche Gadol that the Rebbe says. But still, there was the Raya from the Yerushalmi, even though the Rebbe said you could be Deiche the Raya, the Ein Tzarech Lefarish, but Sof Kol Sof, the Yerushalmi says, Kivan Shehesiv Chazake Kivan. What's the Hechrech that Hesiv? Is a Hechrech, it's a Tnai and Achilas Matzah. If the basis of to say that the Rambam holds that Haseba is a Prata Matzah is from the Yerushalmi, because the Dechia of the Raya from the Yerushalmi is not a strong Dechia, is weiter. What's the Raya from the Yerushalmi that the Rebbe said? Because how does the Yerushalmi say Kivon Shehesiv? Al Korchach, because you see from the Yerushalmi that without Haseba you're not Yetzeh Matzah. And therefore it can't be that he wasn't Mesiv, because if he wasn't Mesiv, he wouldn't be Yetzeh Matzah. It's Tzirik, we come in Zagen like the Rambam, that Haseba is a Tanai and Matzah that's not Likuva. If it's a Tanai and Matzah, not Likuva, you'll have to say that the Rambam is learning like the Dechia of the Raya of the Yerushalmi. Because if we're saying the Raya of the Shittas Rambam is from the Yerushalmi, Muzdach Zayin the Tanai is Likuva, because that's the whole explanation of why the Yerushalmi says Kivan Shehesiv. So I don't understand, if we're saying either of the rayas, which we're saying, that's why the Rambam holds there's two dinim, then how could we entertain a possibility that according to the Rambam it's not a Tanai Li'ikuva? And the same thing, I don't understand the second answer. The Rambam doesn't bring a din shaloi niskar b'gemara lahaj. If we're saying the Rambam holds that there's two didim al karcha, because we're accepting the raya from the Gemara Shama Sha'achol Kizayis Heisiv in Loi Heisiv Im Heisiv Yatza Heisiv in Loi Heisiv Loi, or al kapanim from the Yerushalmi. Shteitach aber the din in Gemara in Yerushalmi. In Gemara, if because it's a deiche gadol to say the Gemara is talking about mitzvahs haseba, therefore we're saying the taich of the Gemara is Heisiv Yatza mitzvahs matzah. You're only Yetza mitzvahs matzah behaseba. So why is that not a din hamafurish b'Gemara? Unless you're going to say that the Rambam, the Raya is not from the Gemara, because in the Gemara you could for like the deiche gadol, and the Raya is beikr mikeach HaYerushalmi. And the Yerushalmi, even though the Yerushalmi says Kivan Shehesiv, but that's all a Raya from the Yerushalmi, on das heißt nicht mefurish in the Yerushalmi. Maybe. But Al Kapadim, the third answer is understood. The first two answers is, I don't understand. And Ten L'chacham v'yach kamayit.